The sea didn't roar the morning we lost our ship. It breathed, slow and tidal, as if the horizon itself were asleep. Our longboat drifted on the swells like a scrap of signature at the edge of a grand painting. 10 of us clung to oars and to an old life that had burned away with the Marrowhawk. The famous black flag, only a singed ribbon tucked inside my coat. Still smelling faintly of smoke and salt, a gull hovered overhead, judging us kindly, while the sun pressed a bright coin to the water and asked what we'd planned to buy with our second chance. There was no compass, no clean plan, only the rough geometry of hope. Birds meant land, a breeze meant direction. Silence meant we should listen. We did. Every creak of plank and slap of wave felt like a sentence starting over. We were pirates by employment, castaways by truth, and human by the thin thread of choosing better. Visual, hand-painted dawn. Small open boat, soft gold light, calm, non-violent. Seascape, Briggs, once our quartermaster and now our accountant of miracles, inventoried the nothing we owned. 7 dry biscuits, 3 sound water kegs, flint, a tin whistle, and the luck we deserve, he said, and we laughed because laughter kept the boat from feeling smaller. Mave, our helmswoman, patched a blister on the oar handle with a strip from a red bandana. Ocho, the musician of Misfits, tested the whistle and coaxed a tune that felt like a porch swing in a summer evening somewhere that had never heard of cannons. We rationed shade with hats and stories, arguing cheerfully about which clouds looked most like towns with warm bread. Our past lay behind us in the smoke, shrinking. Our future was a line of glitter stitched across the water, thin but unbroken. We chose to follow the glitter. Visual, painted still life of biscuit sack, water keg, and a jaunty tin whistle. Warm, safe, palate. By noon, the sun hammered our shoulders until the wood sang with heat. Maeve cooled the oar by dipping it, then told us a story about moving Highland sandbars that wandered like shy giants, turtles old enough to remember different constellations, and harbors where a song bought a loaf. None of us believed her, and all of us did. The point wasn't accuracy. The point was buoyancy. Her words were wind, filling the part of us a sail couldn't reach. Even the gulls seemed to keep time, circling with unhurried dignity, a metronome of white wings. We passed a drifting coconut and cheered like fools, then argued whether the sea gave gifts or simply returned what it took in a better mood. Either way, we drank from the kegs with reverent sips, sealing each with a promise to last the week. Visual, portrait-style painting of a woman rowing beneath a bright sky. Gentle brushwork. No harsh details. When night arrived, it put a velvet thumb to our lips. The moon hung low, pearly and patient, and the sea opened a silver road we were too tired to walk. So we drifted devout, without planning to be. Prayer is what happens when the script runs out, and the stage is still lit. We made promises to the dark water. Fewer cruelties, more listening, quick hands in danger, slower hands in greed. The stars were coins scattered on black silk, daring us to count them. Somewhere a dolphin surfaced inside, a soft candle snuffed in relief. I pressed the charred ribbon of our flag to my heart and pictured a new emblem on no skulls, only an open palm. Visual, moonlit expanse, small boat and tranquil, painterly light. Morning granted us a barrel bobbing near the bow, gray-bearded with age and barnacle charm. Briggs speared it delicately with the boat hook, and we hauled it aboard, half expecting curses inside. Instead, limes bright as little suns, a coil of honest rope, and a child-sized tin whistle's older cousin. A gift, Maeve declared. A test, Briggs corrected. We divided the limes and puckered in joy, the sting waking tired minds like church bells after rain. The rope we coiled with ceremony. Ocho picked the bigger whistle and teased out a jig that convinced our hunger to wait. Diosha had moods, yes, but today's mood felt almost neighborly. Visual, close-up painting of open barrel with limes and rope. Cheerful, safe tones. Our histories followed like shadows, sticky and instructive. I remembered a merchant we robbed who pleaded not for his goods, but for his boy's courage. "Take the sugar," the man said, voice trembling, "but leave a kinder lesson than fear." We left 'em a net and a charted current, and I've wondered since if that mercy accrued interest. Maybe the sea keeps books stricter than any poor clerk debits of cruelty. Credits of grace. Our oars bit water with a steadier rhythm. We were not absolved, not even close, but we were interested in the work, and interests, I've learned, compounds, visual, contemplative faces. Done to horizon, soft sky, no aggression. Clouds veiled the sun like a shawl and the air cooled to a bearable conversation. Birds joined the goal. Turns, quick little commas stitching the sentence of our path. Follow punctuation. Maeve said, "It leads to meaning." We laughed unabated. The birds angled east. The water flattened to slate, and our oars tapped it politely, as if asking the sea for advice. What if they lead us to rocks? What you wondered. Then we crown those rocks and coal them home. Maeve replied. Her smile was thin but durable, like thread through canvas ordinary, essential, unstoppable, visual. Painted flock, guiding a small boat across muted water, whole, full, smooth. The squall announced itself with a cool kiss. Then came the slap. Rain unclenched the day and we worked like cheerful machines, bailing with hats and cupped hands, while thunder paced the far edge of everything. It never came closer, never threatened. It was a gentleman caller who knew when to tip his hat and move on. When the curtain of cloud lifted, a rainbow-threaded sky to see with a stitch he could believe in. Briggs squinted past it. "There," he said, pointing to a shadow hunching under the light like an island that hadn't finished waking. Visual. Rain-washed sea. Distant rainbow. Impressionistic calm. We rowed until our arms argued, then negotiated a truce and rowed more. Dusk softened the edges of the world into kindness. Rocks rose like knuckles. Then a crescent of beach curved open, a mouth offering a word we hadn't heard in days. Rest. The keel scraped sand with a gratitude I felt in my teeth. We stumbled onto shore and lay there, breathing like people who'd forgotten how. No bells, no watch, just the clean loneliness of a place that had gone nameless for a long time and seemed fine about it. Waves rehearsed their lines and landed each one perfectly. Visual. Dusky cove landing. Figures collapsed on pale sand. Calm, painterly, serenity. Sunlit courage returned with a tide. We explored a freckle of an island, a cluster of palms leaning like gossipers. Crabs leaving punctuation marks in damp sand. Lava rock framing a small spring that sang like a well-tuned flute. We drank until our thoughts stood up straighter. This holds us a few days. Reeks judged, already measuring the world in dissolvable pieces. Maeve stared past the reef. Eyes narrowed, mind sketching. "We build," she said, "shelter, signal, and a reason to be found that we can say aloud without lying." Heads nodded, one by one. We stepped into the new job. Visual. Bright cove. Palms. A clear spring, reassuring color and light. We raised shelter from palm ribs and stitched sailcloth. The old skills refit for gentler work. Ocho carved pegs from driftwood. Maeve lashed crossbeams with authority, and I climbed the ridge to learn the island's different voices. Wind threading long grass, surf striking the reef in careful beats. Birds announcing nothing in particular with great joy. On the western side, a lagoon shone turquoise. Fish flashing like tossed coins whenever clouds dappled the surface. If wonder counted as wealth, we were finally rich. If hope could be spent, we had enough to leave a tip. Visual. Hand-painted camp scene with lentu and turquoise shallows. Tranquil. Safe. Briggs made a ledger not of loot, but of ours. "Pirates die of boredom more than bullets," he said, wincing at the memory that used to be ex-pirates. Maeve corrected, and the word felt like cool water. He sliced a day into fair portions. Foraging, fishing, watch, repair, rest. We bristled at schedules and then grew faithful to them, surprised by how discipline felt different without a whip behind it. By evening, our hands were sweet with sap and salt, and our conversations grew honest and the gentleness that tired bodies allow. We talked about food, yes, but also about futures. Our shelter didn't leak, and a small fire braided smoke with starlight. We were alive, and more than that tamed. Visual. Twilight camp with neat tasks. Small fire under a soft sky. No harshness. Food came from study, not luck. We learned which shells hid meals, and which hid arguments. A thicket of pandanus offered fruit that tasted like a citrus stream, and the lagoon surrendered fish when we honored its timing. Maeve tortoise a patient cast. Briggs trekked tides as if balancing accounts, and Ocho blessed each catch with a ridiculous rhyme that somehow made the meals feel earned. We dried strips on racks, boiled shells into broth, and found joy in the long, ordinary work of not starving. At night, moonlight painted the reef in pale necklaces, and we were reduced in the best way to quiet gratitude. Visual. Gentle, still life of drying racks, fruits, and a calm lagoon. Warm, homely tones. Signals mattered. We layered wet leaves over the fire to coax a smoky column that spoke clearly to any ship with eyes. On the ridge, we arranged bright shells into an arrow pointing seaward, then added a second arrow pointing to the spring hospitality as a message to it. Ocho, who could charm storms into delays with a melody, fashioned a conch horn that carried a deep, friendly note across water. We're not begging, Maeve said. We're inviting a different, subtlest thread. Strongness rope it. The horizon remained politely blank, as if considering our manners. Visual. Hand-painted smoke signal on shell arrow. Calm daylight, crisp shapes. Days found a rhythm. The island kept time with shade moving like the hand of a great clock. We repaired oars, burnished the longboat's wounded ribs, and collected resin from trees that smelled of green spices and memory. Briggs tinkered a clay stove from patient mud. Maeve charted the reef's safe cuts by feel. And by the way waves curled their fingers, I wrote a new code in my head for a flag we hadn't sewn. Share first, speak true, steer gentle. Ocho tried the words as a chorus. The island approved, rustling leaves like applause. Visual. Close-up of tools, resin, and a small clay stove. Friendly, handcrafted mood. Storms visited respectfully, draping the sky in dark velvet and combing rain through the palms. We secured what we owned and then surrendered to the music shower on leaves, drum on sand, cymbals on reef, lightning stitched silver on the far edge. Never closer than caution. Afterward the world gleamed. Rocks oiled with brightness, fronds newly combed, lagoon wearing a fresh coin of light. We collected fallen branches and gave thanks to the weather for tiding our pantry. There are tempests that punish, and tempests that water gardens. We have the air ned, or simplement. The latter. Visual. Post-strain. Shine on leaves and sand. Soft reflections. Safe and serene. One morning the tide delivered a crate politely to our feet. Inside, canvas scraps, waxed thread, a bronze needle, and cloves in a tar-sealed jar. We chewed the spice and felt it ring small bells in our mouths. The canvas became patches. The patches became possibilities. A sail, Maeve said. A raft. Briggs countered. A dress. Ocho volunteered, twirling the cloth until laughter salted the beach. We decided together. First repairs, then ambition. The bronze needle glided through old sail like a patient star, mapping its own return. Small things, when stitched, become direction. Visual. Close-up crate with canvas and cloves. Bright, artisan vibe. We built dignity into the boat. New lashings. A rebuked leak. A bench that didn't bruise. The longboat's mood improved. I swear I felt it under me like a cat that has decided you are finally worthy. Maeve tested the reef channel, reading ripples in shadow. As if the water kept a diary in plain sight, we practiced launches and landings until the move felt like a handshake. When a ship comes, we're ready, Briggs said. When a ship doesn't, we're also ready. Maeve replied, readiness, it turns out, tastes a bit like freedom, quiet, nourishing, and repeatable. Visual. Boat care scene in gentle surf. Hands, rope, and wood in calm detail. Stories grew softer around the night fire, as if the dark took the corners off our past. Ocho told how he first chose the whistle over the knife. Maeve admitted she'd once spared a captain who reminded her of an uncle who taught her stars. I confessed to the merchant and his son, and how that day rearranged the furniture of my thinking. No one interrupted. The surf punctuated our sentences and left them standing straight. There was a kind of wealth in being heard without auction. No bids of one-up cruelty. The island sat with us, unjudging, like an old friend who already knows. Visual. Circle at firelight. Faces lit warmly. Peaceful. Reflective composition. We tried the repaired longboat on the long arc outside the lagoon, keeping the reef on our right like a guardian wall. Wind cupped our small sail with shy hands, and we slid along the outer blue, hearts tidy with focused joy. Flying fish skittered like skipped stones, and a turtle lifted its wise face to check our manners. Satisfied, it vanished. When we turned back, the island looked different, familiar from a new angle, which is to say more honest. Perspective does that, for shorelines and for souls. Visual. Boat gliding beside reef. Turtle sighting, sunlit, friendly. Sea, later. The horizon offered a smudge we desperately wanted to be a sail. We signaled, we sang the conch, we waved cloth bright as parrot. The smudge kept its secrets and slid south, unconcerned. Our disappointment came and went like a quick shower. Not our ship, Maeve decided. Maybe someone else's miracle. We've raised another smoke line the next morning anyway, because hope is a habit worth practicing, and habits shape oceans given time. The gull returned, circled once, and made a sound that could almost be approval. We chose to hear it that way. Visual. Distant silhouette ignored by calm sea. Hopeful figures by a clean smoke plume. The day we mapped the island properly, we treated it like a polite conversation rather than a conquest. Maeve led north along a string of tide pools clear as glass. Each one, a tiny gallery where starfish posed like careful ornaments and sea urchins wore the solemn look of scholars. I sketched the shoreline with charcoal and sailcloth, while Briggs measured paces and angles, building a shy sort of intimacy with the land. In a shaded ravine, we found wild ginger and a trickle of water that tasted like lattice-work delicate. Surprising, and more complex than thirst expected. Ocho composed the walking song to set our cadence. Nothing grand, just a hummed braid of notes that made the work lighter and the silence friendly. By sundown, our chart was on us. Not a promise, not a boast, simply a mirror. Knowing where you are, we learned, is a quieter miracle than finding treasure, and usually more useful. Visual. Hand-painted shoreline map scene. Tide pools glinting, gentle colors, calm mood. The lagoon revealed a secret at low tide. A stone shelf that rose like a stage, corrugated with old coral and flanked by pools where tiny fish rehearsed silver choruses. We used it to teach ourselves patience. Casting lines there required the soft hands you'd use with a frightened bird. Maeve corrected our grip and our breathing until the hook landed like a whispered question rather than a demand. When the fish took it, we thanked the water aloud and let Ocho give a dignified flourish on the whistle, more blessing than celebration. Even Briggs stopped counting for a moment to admire the light folding itself into the lagoon. We ate simply grilled fillets, pandanus fruit, a broth that smelled faintly of the reef at dawn. The meal did more than fill us. It introduced us to ourselves as people capable of gentleness at scale. Visual. Painted tidal shelf, with small fire and careful anglers. Soft evening light. We set about weaving rope from coconut husk and hibiscus bark, a lesson in surrendering to the material. The fibers insisted on their own rhythm. Pull too hard and they sulked. Slack too much, and they unraveled into chaos. Under Maeve's coaching, our hands found the middle path, and soon corals of serviceable line nested at our feet, like sleeping snakes with good manners. With rope came possibilities. A sturdier lean-to, a better fish trap, the outline of a future sail. Tools are the grammar of hope, Briggs announced, pleased with his own metaphor, and for once no one teased him. We understood he was right. Each knot we learned was a new sentence we could say to the world. We will hold, we will carry, we will rise. Visual. Close-up of braided rope, hands, knit warm artisan palette, safe imagery. On the ridge south of camp we discovered a cave no bigger than a sailor's dream. Inside, the air was cool as the inside of a seashell, and a shallow basin collected water drop by faithful drop. Sometime it scratched a compass rose into the wall. The line smoothed by years of patient wind. We stood quietly, feeling the echo of other footsteps, other breaths, castaways before us, explorers passing through. Tekabe didn't answer, but it offered instruction. Leave useful things behind. Maps, kindness. We added our contribution. A small clay jar sealed with wax, filled with dried fruit, and a note that read, "If you're lost, you're not alone. Follow birds at dawn. Reef opens east." It wasn't charity. It was tradition. To good keen. Visual. Interior cave painting. Faint compass rose, cool blues and soft stone textures. Conflict came not like lightning, but like a squeaky hinge. Briggs wanted a strict ration for every hour. Ocho argued that music and morale needed the occasional feast day. Mive listened, then offered an equation with both soul and numbers. Every seventh evening, she ruled, we would have a bright meal. A little extra broth, a share of fruit, stories in long shapes, and a song that stretched past bedtime. In exchange, the other 6 days would be neat and honest. Her ledger's tight as a well-made sail. They compromised in silenced disagreement. It taught us to argue kindly, to let truth arrive without violence. Over time, the hinge stopped squeaking. The door swung clean. Visual, quiet counsel by firelight. Faces attentive, warm tones. Hand-painted serenity. We began collecting drift planks and storm limbs, sorting them the way a luthier chooses wood by resonance and temperament. When struck lightly, the right pieces answered with a generous hum. The wrong ones with a sulk. With ease we sketched a raft upon the sand. Crossbeams like ribs, lashings like tendons. A modest mast stepped through a cradle we carved from ironwood. We should name her now, Ucha said. Ever a romantic, Maeve shook her head. Names are promises, let her breathe first. So we worked without christening, letting design reveal character. By sunset, the outline looked less like a contraption and more like a companion waiting for its first story. Visual. Beach workshop scene. Raft skeleton on sand. Soft sunset. No harsh detail. Navigation lessons turned the sky into a library. May have taught us to read the wind by the catspaw ripples, the currents by long swells shouldering along beneath surface chatter, the stars by their seasonal gossip. We made a paper quadrant from sailcloth and a sliver of shell, then checked it against shadows, against instinct, against the gull's immodest confidence. 1,000 tiny certainties make one good decision, she said, and the phrase branded itself inside me like a gentle fire. We practiced until our necks ached from looking up and our hearts slowed to the tempo of reliable things. The island felt less like a prison and more like a classroom with respectable views. Visual figures. Figures tracing constellations with a shell quadrant. Crisp night. Sparkling stars. One afternoon the beach delivered a weathered spar with brass fittings, still dignified in their tarnish. We cleaned it with sand and patience, then repurposed the hardware into cleats and a gooseneck for the small masts. Progress sang in little clicks the sound of a bolt seating. A line running fair. A hinge that agreed with its companion. Briggs entered each improvement in the ledger, not out of obsession, but gratitude. Record the good as faithfully as the losses, he said. Says a book tells the whole truth. The raft began to resemble an intention rather than an accident. Even the goal seemed to approve, landing on the bow and pretending, briefly, to be our visual. Close-up of brass fittings on newly shaped mast. Clean, safe, maritime detail. At dusk, we tried our conch horn from the reef's outer edge, letting its deep, friendly note travel along the blue road where ships and kinder worlds keep appointments. The sound went out and came back with a subtle echo. Like a handshake returned, we added a smoke column from dried palm fronds, and layered a splash of color canvas squares stitched into a banner that said, "Friend," to any captain literate, and compassion. No sail cut toward us, but the horizon's silence felt less indifferent than before, more like someone listening carefully for the right moment to speak. Hope, we realized, is a conversation that respects pauses. Visual. Reef edge with conch call and smoke signal. Patient twilight. Hand-painted calm. The bright meal evening arrived with moonlight polished to a soft coin. We ate slowly, grateful in a way that didn't collapse into hunger's panic. Stories unspooled, cleaned of swagger, heavy with detail. Jokes tucked in like well-placed nails. Ocho sang a lullaby for people who planned to wake up. A small song that made tomorrow feel reachable by ordinary steps. Mai finally spoke the raft's name aloud. A whisper folded into the sound of the surf. Second chance. The words felt earned, not dramatic. We sealed the name with clove oil on the mast and sat quietly, while the sea agreed in patient syllables. Visual. Night camp, with modest feast. Mast inscribed second chance. Silver moonlight. Tranquil palette. The week of final preparations moved like a thoughtful tide. Forward. Pause. Forward again. We tested every lashing until the rope answered with a small, honest hum. Warm resin sealed seams with a scent that remembered forests instead of raids. We set the raft on drift log rollers, so the slide to water felt like a sentence, finally finding its verb. Mauve drilled compact commands. The wind would respect trim ease. Bear away. Hold while Briggs measured water in hours, turning thrift into calm. Ocho tuned whistle and conch so encouragement could travel farther than shouting. I wrote a plain blessing. May our choices be kinder than our fears. And tucked it beneath the forward beam, out of sight, exactly where humility works best. At dusk we stepped back and let wood speak. Some holes groaned like sleepers with bad dreams. Hours rested with the hush of a clean library. The cove accepted evening's soft grammar. Gold perched like a patient inspector. And even the reef looked approving. The blue key waiting in its lock. Visual. Hand-painted beach workshop. Raft on rollers. Lantern glow. Calm palette. No harsh imagery. We kept the ceremony small, so courage could stay practical. By a tidy fire we placed a woven basket and agreed to leave one relic from the life we no longer wished to fund. I folded the charred ribbon of our black flag, saluted without nostalgia, and laid it down like a canceled debt. Ocho contributed dice that had once stolen other men's outcomes. The click sounded smaller than his new voice. Briggs polished a brass coin from a port we had left poorer than we found, then surrendered it clean, the way you wipe a slate because you plan to use it well. Maeve placed a broken boarding hook whose dulled point had forgotten the thrill of harm. We spoke what we would carry instead. Patience that outlasts weather, clarity that speaks early, gentleness with edges, direction that doesn't borrow fear. We did not burn the basket. We buried it near the little cave with its soft compass rose, turning endings into a quiet archive future feet might appreciate. Visual. Moonlit circle. Shallow grave. Serene faces. Soft brushwork. Safe tones. The island offered a rehearsal we hadn't requested, and we thanked it for the lesson. A confident tide pushed drift and secrets up the sand until our camp had to prove it could move as neatly as it had formed. Maeve called lines with harbor mess to poise. I lifted the food chest before a curious wave could interview it. Ocho shepherded tools into higher shade. Briggs slung waterskins and counted without panic. Friendly math that steadied all of us. The tide reached where our bedrolls had been, crossed that sentence out, then retreated, satisfied with its edit. Nothing lost, much learned. We redrew camp to palm lengths inland, raised drying racks, reset the stove, and logged the change like sailors who respect margins. Better a rehearsal than an obituary, Briggs said, and for once the word felt like sunlight, not chill. We understood leaving would be safe only if order could travel, no dazzling improvisations, just reliable steps repeated well. Offshore, a storm line kept its manners. Afternoon returned, polished, as if courage had tried on work clothes and liked the fit. Visual. Sun-glossed, shallows, nudging camp.com figures. Non-violent scene. We walked to the island once more, not to hunt novelty, but to memorize gratitude. At the spring, we cleared stones from its mouth and scraped a small channel so a thirsty stranger's cup would find the water. As at the cave, we checked the wax-sealed jar and read our note as if we were frightened and needed unflustered counsel. Nita, follow birds. At dawn, the reef opens east. The words felt like a hand offered across a table, not a sermon from a height. On the ridge, we arranged shells into an open palm welcome. Pause. Peace. Nenni language and, where the smoke pit had stood, we built a low cairn of lava rock to say. Simply, someone lived here and tried to leave it better. Ocho planted a pandanus, seedling in the lee of a stone. A wager against wind and time. May you shade a stranger, he said. A prayer that used sunlight as its ink, visual. Montage cleared spring, shell hand, modest cairn, green seedling, bright, benevolent light. Departure dawn opened with library manners. Quiet doors, polished air, attention tiding the world. We ate rehearsal food coconut, a measured strip of dried fish. Sips of water rolled across the tongue like promises that expect to be kept. Maeve pressed her palm to the mast step, greeting craft with craft, then checked each pup, heel, partner, pin-like names, on a guest list, prepared to refuse drama. Briggs slid the ledger into oilskin and wore truth as a tool rather than a trophy. Ocho lashed a conch beneath the forward beam, its single eye tilted toward possibility, while its whistle hung at his neck like a lark, ready to learn hymns. I rolled our map into a bamboo tube and sealed it with wax until it resembled a firm sentence. We stood a breath longer than necessary, not superstitious, just grateful to a shore that taught without scorn. Thank you, Maeve said. The wind answered with a courteous nod. Visual. Tranquil. Pastels. Figures. Readying raft. Clean composition. Safe. Painterly. Style. The launch read like a line we'd practiced until bone remembered. Rollers beneath. Level the plank on the waves and hail. Push on the exhale. And the raft sighed into the lagoon with the modest pride of a dancer stepping into first light. The patched canvas climbed and filled not with bravado, with acceptance, chest choosing to breathe after grief. Maeve held the steering oar loose, yet persuasive, proving guidance can be kind without losing authority. The reef gate opened where study promised, a blue door whose hinges weed oiled with patience. We slipped through as softly as an apology, meaning it, and the open swell met us like a conversation rather than a duel. The island leaned back into the horizon, more friend than fortress now. None of a waved. Important farewells live where ribs keep them from spilling. Visual. Raft clearing turquoise gates into deeper blue. Gentle sun, come. Nonviolent, maritime scene. Beyond the reef, the ocean wrote longer sentences, and we learned to read with our knees. Swells shouldered along like paragraphs. Wind added punctuation you could feel in your teeth. Rolls settled into names. Briggs minded numbers and the shadow clock, balancing the book of distance with the currency of time. Ocho tended lines and morale, humming small tunes that invited the canvas to relax into work. I trimmed the sheet, measured desire against detail, and kept the horizon honest. Maeve steered with quiet rulership that made obedience feel like relief. Our code traveled clean. Share first. Speak true. Steer gentle. Decisions met a table, not a throne. The raft learned us. We learned her. A satisfied creak meant fair run. A curious groan asked for attention. Salons when load and wind the line felt. Like trust, visual. Orderly crew on open blue. Painterly whites and blues. Peaceful energy. Midday heat arrived with manners, laying a hand on our shoulders rather than our throats. We rigged an awning that gathered a pool of shade big enough for fair turns and cooked with the unhurried focus that makes food taste like a kept promise. Hocho filleted tuna, with the calm of a caffeletterette. Maeve seasoned with salt, and a crushed leaf that remembered gardens. Briggs portioned evenly, and the fairness flavored the meat as surely as spice. I watched steam drift like a tiny weather we'd earned the right to make. We out to slowly letting gratitude finish speaking before reaching for seconds we didn't need. Water passed in measured sips that felt like respect, not denial. Distances looked friendly corridors where patience could stretch its legs. Visual, cooking beneath canvas, gentle smoke, domestic ease at sea. Afternoon loosened to a thoughtful tempo, and we matched it, refusing to demand spectacle from a generous day. The wind lowered its voice, so we reefed to keep our promises tidy. Maeve taught us to read catspaw ripples as friendly handwriting, and to greet small gusts with a nod rather than a grab. Briggs told dead-reckoning bedtime stories. Speed in honest inches, direction kept by constellations. You can hum, distance measured by time, treated like a companion, not prey. I practiced trimming by a finger's width, until the sail answered like an instrument newly in tune. Ocho found a melody that sat beside silence without trying to replace it. The horizon neither threatened nor fled. It agreed to be accompanied. Visual. Slack, canvas tended with care, wide horizon and muted afternoon tones. Contemplative, safe mood. Evening raised a modest testa squall with excellent posture so. We used weather voices. Short, steady, kind. We checked lashings, lowered the awning, and set angles for comfort rather than bravado. Rain arrived as silver threads, wind as sturdy music, waves as measured applause. Maeve kept us on the easy edge where effort multiplies quietly. Briggs timed gusts with ledger patience. Ocho kept lines singing. I eased and trimmed by breaths instead of shouts. The pressure passed, a kakwaya moving down a corridor present. Resonant, then gone. Clouds rolled their instruments east. The sea gleamed newly varnished. We stood in the rinsed, dark, feeling taller without moving. Courage less like a trumpet and more like a well-fitted coat. Visual. Soft-edged squall, reefed canvas. Rain sheen on timbers. Post-storm clarity beneath punctual stars. Morning returned with a civilized breeze and a sky so polished it felt newly minted. We shook the sleep from our shoulders and reviewed our small covenant share first. Speak true, steer gentle, then set the raft to its tasks with the quiet competence of people who've learned what not to dramatize. Maeve checked the mast step and the luff. Briggs logged our course, speed, and the way the swell braided under the hull. Ocho coaxed a sprightly tune that made the canvas stand a little taller. I scanned for birds and the faint change in watercolor that hints at shoals or an island shelf politely waiting under the blue. We took turns at the steering oar, each of us speaking with the sea, in slightly different grammar but the same intention. Respect. Midway through the morning, a pair of Dorado flared gold-green under the bow, and then vanished. Like good luck that prefers privacy, we grinned anyway. Progress felt modest, measurable, and extraordinarily human. Visual. Bright, mid-morning sea. Raft moving cleanly, fine brushwork. Friendly ways, safe, nautical scene. By midday, heat gathered its choir, but it sang in a key we could live with. We stretched the awning, kept shade democratic, and cooked a patient meal, using the small stove that had become our good-natured hearth. Ocho filleted a fish with the economy of movement that comes from repeating kindness. Maeve added herbs we had dried on the island. Briggs split portions with the same fairness he used on water and distance. I watched a single cloud parade its shadow across the sea like a traveling theater with only one actor but an infinite stage. We ate slowly, noticing texture, salt, the quiet sweetness that arrives when hunger isn't panicked. Between bites, Maeve taught a knot, whose entire philosophy was forgiveness. Easy to tie, easier to release. We'll use it when plans change, she said, smiling like someone who trusts life's edits. The afternoon promised no drama, only the deep relief of competence practiced out loud. Visual, soft deck, scene under awning, gentle steam. Simple bowls, calm oils, no harsh elements. The wind shifted a polite quarter, and with it came a procession of flying fish, little silver letters skipping across a blue page. We read the message as encouragement. Maeve adjusted our heading by a hand's width, and the raft settled into a new sentence of motion, smoother even than before. Briggs explained leeway and drift with a shell and a sliver of charcoal, drawing arrows on the deck that the spray erased just in time for the next point. Ocho turned the lesson into rhythm, tapping the mast lightly so ideas would land in our bones as well as our heads. I kept watch for the faintest disobedience in the sail, the slack that whispers before it shouts. When a small gust shouldered through, we eased and trimmed without fuss, staying on the raft's comfortable edge where effort multiplies instead of breaks. The sea responded by keeping company rather than picking an argument. It felt less like travel and more like conversation with a patient elder. Visual. Close focus on sail and hands. Light spray. Serene, educational tone. Safe, maritime detail. Late afternoon brought a thoughtful hush, the sort that suggests writing a letter you'll send by horizon. We checked lashings, tasted the water, and rehearsed our dusk routine. Reef to prudent size, secure the stove. Coil lines into tidy sleeping spirals. Mave spoke a night's sailing as if she were introducing us to a dignified friend. Respect the stars, greet the swell with your knees, and let the wind keep half the conversation. Briggs prepared the ledger's night page, a map of check-ins rather than obsessions. Ocho chose a melody that could sit beside starlight without competing, something round and slow that helped the nerves find their chairs. I waxed the bamboo tube that held our chart, a small act that felt like sharpening a pencil before poetry. The world leaned toward evening without hurry, kindly as a librarian dimming lamps one by one. We were ready to be small and precise. Visual pre-dusk preparations, coiled lines, rev kumbas, warm twilight palette, calm composition. Night unveiled its jeweled grammar constellations. We had practiced like a second alphabet. Mavie traced the arc of a familiar sailor's path with a shard of shell, then let the real stars take over. We steered by a crooked kite, checked by a stubborn arrow, and measured time with a patient dog that refused to move quickly across the sky. The raft creaked in fluent syllables. Our bodies answered in balance and considered breath. Briggs counted silently between gusts to feel the air's mood. Ocha left the whistle in his pocket and chose to hum no melody at all. But better to hear the ocean's famous lullaby. I felt the old fear try the latch of my ribs, and then think better of it. Distances at night can look like verdicts. Under good stars, they feel like invitations. When a slow phosphorescent bloom flared off the bow, we admired it like a candle lit for travelers. We did not chase wonder. We let it pass, visual. Starbright sea, faint wake. Glow, gently, chiaroscuro. Hent painted. Serenity. Toward midnight, the wind took a thoughtful step back. We left a conservative reef in. I led the raft idle on long, obedient swells, taking turns. We each held the steering oar for a silent watchdom counts on the breath. Eyes between sail and sky, hands loose enough to forgive our own adjustments. Mavev's hour looked like focus disguised as rest. Briggs's like arithmetic converted to prayer. Oko's like a lullaby no one needed but everyone loved. Mine was a lesson in trust. The sort that leaves you feeling taller without standing. A cloud shouldered across the moon, and the sea answered with darker ink. We held our temper and our trim. When the light returned, it did so modestly, as if apologizing for a brief absence. No one, my indeed, we had learned to be our own small lamps. Visual, moon veiled and unveiled. Steady helm, subdued blues and silvers. Calm, safe mood. Dawn fanned us still tai, which is victory at sea. Pink seeped into the east like kindness, returning to a complicated story. Maeve stretched, smiled without announcement, and called for a larger bite of canvas. The sail accepted, pleased to be useful. Briggs reported our best estimate a ribbon of miles we could claim with honest end, then closed the ledger gently, as if not to wake pride. Ocho brewed a thin tea, whose steam smelled faintly of the island's green memory. I scanned the water and felt a smudge of darker blue almost before I saw it. Depth changing, perhaps a shelf, perhaps a promise. We held our course, but prepared our courtesy soundings ready. Lines clear, hearts unhurried. No, not Reeb. The goal appeared. Then a sec on both gliding like punctuation that confirms meaning. We answered with quiet hands and a hopeful stove. Visual. Roselit dawn. Sail filling. Distant birds. Hopeful pastel oils. Non-violent seascape. By late morning, the color of the sea shifted from royal to a friendlier turquoise. The kind that remembers sand even when it's shy. We shortened sail, shipped to the steering oar, and took 2 paddles in slow, respectful strokes. Maeve read the water by texture where ripples gathered like whispers, where smoothness hinted at depth, where a pale ribbon meant a bar not to be flirted with. Briggs made soundings with a weighted line and announced them like polite door knocks. Ocho stood at the bow with the conch, ready to sing if welcome seemed wiser than surprise. I washed for that pale, decisive green that tells you a lagoon is considering you. When it appeared, we did not rush. We shaped ourselves to the gate the reef offered and entered on the exhale of a small swell. Partners rather than conquerors. Visual. Lagoon. Approach over coral gate. Paddles out. Careful faces. Bright, safe color. Classic brushwork. Inside the reef, the world exhaled. Water changed voice from sermon to conversation, and the raft floated like a thought that had finally found its sentence. We scanned the curve of shore. Palms leaning like generous listeners, a crescent of honest sand, and behind it a scatter of dark rock with the promise of shade. No huts. No smoke. Only the feeling that we had arrived somewhere that would withhold judgment long enough for us to become better company. Maeve chose a landing with soft sand and no drama. Briggs marked the bearings. Ocho tuned to the conch, to thankful. I felt a tremor of grief for the many versions of myself. The sea had patiently worn down, then my feet found the sand, and the grief dissolved into something quieter and more durable. Permission. We grounded the raft with a whisper rather than a shout and stood together in a silence that hasn't learned to be awkward. Visual. Tranquil beach landing. Raft kissing sand, sun-washed oils, gentle figures. Safe scene. We unpacked with ceremony disguised as tidiness. Shade first, water next, then a small cooking circle that remembered every lesson the island had taught us. Maeve inspected the palms for fronds that had already decided to fall. Briggs laid out tools and a neat fan that made work feel like music. Ocho set the conch on a flat rock, as if it were an honored elder. I walked the upper beach and found turtle tracks stitched like ancient handwriting across the night. It's a smooth page proof that the island kept its own calendar of miracles. We ate a modest meal and left the shore as clean as we'd found it. When the afternoon wind curled a finger, we answered with gratitude rather than goals. This was not an end, we agreed, but a chapter with good margins. The raft rested above the tide line, smiling in timber, and our hunger had the decency to wait its turn. Visual. Tidy camp on new shore. Tools fanned. Turtle tracks. Warm, calm, palette, hand-painted safety. The new cove felt like a book with wider margins. After securing second chance above the tide line, we walked ashore in a patient arc, letting the place introduce itself. Palms leaned as if eager to eavesdrop. The surf rehearsed soft lines and got them right on the first try. We found a spring under a lip of basalt, its water tasting faintly of copper and green shade. I rinsed a salt from my hair and felt the old ship's smoke finally release its last echo. Maeve mapped the reef cuts with her eyes. That quiet geometry she trusted more than rumor. Briggs, irrepressible, began a fresh ledger. Day 1, Cove. 2, Spirit steady. Ocho tested the conch, then set it down as though it were a visiting elder who preferred to listen. We agreed to camp lightly, no scars. Only signatures until we understood the island's habits. The air held a sweetness I couldn't name. Perhaps it was simply relief, learning to speak. Visual. New cove walk. A salt spring. Relaxed figures. Warm brushwork. Friendly colors.com scene. We built shade from palm ribs and the reserve canvas. A practical cathedral where small work could feel like devotion. Maeve sketched a windbreak that convinced the breeze to behave. I fashioned a tripod for the stove from drift branches that clicked together like polite conspirators. Briggs rigged a rain catch from sailcloth and a bamboo gutter, and then stood back, pleased not with cleverness, but with the reduction of worry. Ocho braided a clothesline and pinned our sea-worn shirts like flags from a very modest fleet. We cooked a broth of reef fish and pandanus, shared fruit in fair turn, and saved the last cup for the spring, a simple toast to beginnings that don't pretend to be endings. The goal perhaps ours. Perhaps its cousin perched on a rock and tilted its head as if taking attendance. Present, Maeve said. And we laughed because it felt true. Visual, tidy shade shelter, stove tripod, raincat, domestic, hand-painted ease. No harsh elements. Exploration began with listening. We followed a path of fallen fronds inland and found a grove where the light arrived in coins. Lizards watched from bark, the way librarians watch the door alert. Not unfriendly, the ground rose gently to a ridge with a view of both sea faces. From there, the island revealed its modest sprawl. 2 crescents of sand, a spine of dark stone, and reef halos that glowed like careful jewelry. We marked a safe descent with coral chips and gathered a bundle of deadfall wood for later fires. We promised to keep small. On the way back, Ocho uncovered a half-buried clay pot, empty but uncracked, a sign that someone, sometime, had cared to store grain or hope. We buried it again for whomever the island had in mind next, and left a shell on top like a nod. Not every discovery requires a pocket. Some prefer a witness. Visual, ridge overlook, coral markers, reburied pot, soft afternoon palette, respectful mood. By late day, we tested the lagoon in a circle, no wider than Prudence. Maeve steered. I watched depth by color. Briggs called the rhythm of paddles, and Ocho kept a low tune that matched the ripples. We practiced ferrying loads from raft to beach, letting movement turn its silence. The reef gate here was narrower, but it behaved like a well-taught door, hinges quiet, swing predictable. A turtle rose near the bow, blinked as if approving our manners, and slid away like a sentence finished cleanly. We returned to shore without hurry and stowed gear as if future us were valued guests. The evening wind arrived with sleeve-rolled generosity, cooling skin and temper alike. We set a small fire well below the palms, cooked simply and told only new stories, days' work, day's luck, day's lesson. The old tailies could wait their turn. Visual lagoon practice loop, turtle sighting, tidy landing, golden hour oils, peaceful activity. Night on the second island had a different grammar. Crickets stitched to background, the sea accepted rather than drowned, and the stars felt closer, as if the sky were leaning in to hear. We kept a watch in pairs, not out of fear, but courtesy. Places, like people, prefer being looked after. During my turn with Maeve, we spoke in the shorthand of crews that trust each other. 1 word for reef whisper, 2 for wind pivot, a nod for let it be. When a faint glow pulsed beyond the headland, we held still and listened. No drum of oars, no cry, only the slow wink of distant lightning painting cloud edges. Weather, not company. We exhaled. The raft creaked once, a contented hinge. I thought of how many versions of us had not survived to learn calm. Then I stopped counting and let the quiet finish its song. Visua. Stylet camp. Faint fur of lightning. Paired watch. Gentle. Chiaroscuro. Safe stillness. Morning found turtle tracks like calligraphy again, looping between sea and dunes. We read them with the reverend city folk. Give cathedrals. Briggs sketched the pattern, then closed the book, as if not to bother the sacred with measurements. Maeve proposed we leave gifts for whatever future feed read this shore. A bundle of dry kindling tied with shell cord, a small stake marking the spring, and a neat arrow of white stones pointing to the best landing. Ocho wrote a 4-line verse on a palm strip kind. Simple, easy to translate even without words. Tucked it under the rain catch for any eyes desperate enough to search there. I shaped a shallow step in the sand ramp where it was steep. The difference between stumble and welcome, none of it felt grand. That was its grace. Visual, morning gift kindling bundle. Marked spring, bright, benevolent tones, painterly simplicity. We treated the raft as a guest who deserved comfort. Lines were fresh coiled, seams inspected, mast foot greased with a whisper of oil rendered from coconut. Mive tightened a lashing by a patient finger's width, and the whole frame sight in relief. Proof that small care multiplies. Briggs painted friend on a square of canvas with charcoal and sea water faded, but legible to any captain educated in mercy. Ocho braided a new pendant from palm fiber and cloves. The scent lifted our mood without asking permission. I scraped the keel clean of lingering barnacle ghosts and felt the timber thank me with a kinder glide underhand. She'll carry us farther if we carry her well, Maeve said. We all agreed, not in chorus, but in the unremarkable way habits agree with bones. Visual. Raft maintenance. Close-up slashing. Pendant. Keel. Intimate oils calm craft energy. By midday, the horizon tempted with a darker seam of blue, the sort that hints at distant weather or far reefs hoarding their own lagoons. We debated sailing, to scout it, and chose, instead, to let patience win a turn. Maeve drew 2 roots in the sand. One bold and lean on luck, one deliberate and fat with return options. Tomorrow, she said, we test the deliberate. Briggs seconded. Not from caution but from affection for survival done elegantly. Ocho proposed a training hour. Maneuverboard drill without the man, sail reduction by touch, and a quiet practice of re-entering the lagoon in a hurry without making it look like panic. I timed, trimmed, fetched, and learned competence. It turns out, tastes better than bravado, and sits lighter on the stomach. Visual. Beach planning diagram. Practice maneuvers on calm water. Clear, instructive palette. Safe action. Afternoon gave us a visitor. A frigate bird circling high. A black signature written with a confident pen. It wrote thermals like someone who knew old secrets, and it stopped bragging about them. We watched it for weather clues, then for the pleasure of admiring a creature that understood both thrift and spectacle. Ocho hummed a line that matched its glide. Maeve adjusted our drawing line so the breeze could work without snagging. Briggs closed his eyes and committed the bird's effortless banking to memory. A geometry lesson the sky had offered free. When it finally drifted seaward, we felt genuinely applauded as if the island had stamped our temporary visas approved. We answered by tiding. Camp 1, unnecessary notch. The better to honor the approval. Visua. Frigate bird. High above cove. Camp below. Airy composition. Elegant lines. Tranquil color. We closed the day with a council that fit neatly into dusk. The questions were simple. Sail tomorrow, or watch one more sunrise. Hug the coast, or trust the outer blue. How to keep our code unfrayed. If days grow lean. Share first. Speak true. Steer gentle and of it dramatic. All of it binding. Maeve proposed a dawn departure with the tide's good manners guiding the bow. Briggs would set conservative rations, and a check-in rhythm that made care feel like music. Ocho promised a song for stubborn spirits, and a silence for listening at the right times. I pledged to keep the map honest, even when desire pressed its thumb upon the scale. We sealed it not with oaths, but with the ordinary magic of a well-tended fire and bowls scraped clean. The stars began their punctual work. We slept like tools laid out for morning. Visual. Twyla Council. By Smolfire. Starlight above. Warm, calm oils. Safe. Closing scene. Dawn unrolled like careful silk, and we moved with the tide's polite encouragement. Second chance slid from sand to water with a whisper. Our rollers stacked aside like instruments resting between songs. Maeve trimmed the small sail for the morning's shy breeze, and the raft leaned into it not boldly, not timidly, just willing. Briggs checked the ledger's fresh page, noting time, wind, swell direction, and a small remark. Spirit steady. Ocho tucked the conch beneath the forward beam and tied the clove-scented pendant, so it could remind us that grace sometimes has a smell. I secured our ring catch and tucked the palm strip verse under its cord again, a pocket talisman that meant start soft. The reef gate opened on the swell's exhale, and we stepped through as though entering a library, hats off. Voices low. Attention. Awake. Beyond. The ocean received us like a conversation ready to deepen. We didn't cheer. We breathed, and let competence be loud for us. Visual. Pale sunrise over a turquoise gate. Raft gliding outward. Warm, quiet brushwork. Safe. Maritime.com. By mid-morning, the breeze found its stride. A steady companionable shove that didn't insist on heroics. We set a modest course northeast. The color of water shading from lagoon blue to the richer ink of distance. Maeve showed me how to read the sail's tiny betrayals, the flicker at the loof, the talkative wrinkleland. How kindness lives in an inch of ease. Briggs demonstrated his neat trick of converting shadow lengths to speed, a patient abacus that kept our pride from adding zeros. Ocho parceled music sparingly. A few whistle notes to rinse the air and then silence so the sea could utter its vowels. I kept a sketch map in pencil on the bamboo tube. Short strokes for wind shifts, dots for bird sightings. A small star wherever we remembered to be wise. The raft's voice matured. A contented creak when lines ran fair. Up a light throat clear when a lashing wanted attention. We answered quickly. Our manners improving. Visua. Broad, cobalt sea. Trim sail. Attentive crew. Classical oils. Bright yet gentle palette. Non-violent detail. A procession of flying fish escorted us for a minute that felt longer. They stitched silver cursive across the tops of waves. Each leap a letter only the ocean could fully read. We laughed, softly, unwilling to scare the message away. Maeve nudged our heading by a thumb's width to ride a more generous angle, and the raft sank into a calmer rhythm, like finding the right stride after a hill. Briggs taught leeway with a seashell and a line in damp wood, and when the spray erased his diagram, it felt like the sea grading homework we had passed. Ocho tapped the mast in a gentle tempo to set our pulls at the steering oar, and the canvas answered with a satisfied sigh. I noticed a shadow under the bow, a school of Smotuna, all-purpose and Shinden. They vanished, quick as a thought you'll recall later with better words. Nothing dramatic happened, which was the day's quiet excellence. We were carried, and we behaved as if we deserved that trust. Visual. Close view of leaping fish beside a small raft. Sunlit spray. Lively, but safe. Seascape. Near noon. He'd arrived in formal attire but with friendly manners. We rigged the awning, laid the steering oar across our knees, and practiced the generous art of shade rotation. Lunch was orderly joy. Seared strips of yesterday's catch, a small pan of broth, and fruit divided with Briggs's precise affection for fairness. We spoke of signs to watch, forebirds flying with purpose, a change in wave timbre near hidden shoals, the flutter of cloud shadows on water that sometimes reveals the shape beneath. Mavi taught a quick-release hitch she calls the edit, a knot that lets you revise without tearing the page. Ocho suggested a story round with one rule. Tell a memory without making yourself the hero. The rules made the stories better, which felt like a lesson about design and the human heart. The ocean breathed in long paragraphs. We matched its punctuation and felt literacy return to our bones. Visual. Deck under dappled shade. Simple bowls. Awning lifting. Warm painterly domesticity at sea. Calm and safe. Afternoon soft to the color of fresh linen. The wind thinned 2 threads, and we honored it by reefing sooner than pride might have allowed. Under the smaller sail, Second Chance kept her dignity, gliding as if she'd learned to walk in quiet corridors. Navy pointed out catspaw ripples and had me speak their meanings aloud. Samasa could memorize the vowels. Briggs added a page to the ledger titled, "If the Wind Forgets Us," filled with small chores that protect morale. Sharpen the marlin spike. Oil the blocks. Write a note for tomorrow's wiser self. Ocha hummed. Nothing recognizable. Trusting the ocean to choose harmony. I took the bamboo tube and drew the sky's Lajit the crooked kite. The arrow. The slow dog of our so when night arrived we would greet old friends by their nicknames. We were not fast. We were fluent. Sometimes that is the richer triumph. Visual slackened canvas over glassy waves. Crew tending small tasks. Muted afternoon tones. Contemplative. Non-violent scene. Toward evening, the sea gifted in astonishment. A whale surfacing beside us with the decorum of a visiting monarch. Its eye was a patient moon, reflecting us smaller than we felt and kinder than we deserved. We stood so still our thoughts had to whisper to be heard. The spout lifted a glittering veil that fell back like applause stitched with light. Maeve lowered her voice to the register, people reserved for cathedrals. Briggs closed the ledger as if the numbers might interrupt. Ocho didn't reach for the whistle. He bowed, a habit he must have learned from silence. The whale lingered, exhaled again, and slid from page to margin to myth. No omen, no sermon, omnipresence that tuned the room of the world. After it vanished, our raft seemed to float with better posture. We had received a masterclass in traveling lodge, while leaving no bruise. Visual. Whale alongside a small raft. Sunlit mist. Impressionistic edges. Reverent, but safe. Imagery. A gentle squall arrived after sunset. The kind that irons creases out of heat. We prepared like good students. Awning down. Lashings checked. Lines coiled with the promise of quick release. Rain played silver strings across the deck while wind conducted in modest crescendos. Maeve kept us on the comfortable edge, where the sail works without grievance. Briggs cold gust timings, with a metronome's grace. Not now. Easy Ocho kept the tail of the sheet singing through his hands. No snags, no drama. I eased a finger's worth when the loof began to fret and felt the raft relax underfoot. The squall passed like a polite guest, left the room cleaner than it found it, offered thanks and fresher air, and closed the door gently behind. We raised a sip of water to the dark and let the stars return to their punctual duties. Visual, rain-washed, deck, reefed canvas. Shining timbers, postering clarity under a star-spread sky, calm palette, midnight watch, taught small bravery. The wind forgot us for an hour, and the raft rode long swells like a breath practiced slower than habit. We left a cautious reef in, kept the steering or steady, and listened for the sea's old story told in new cadence. I counted between faint gusts, until I could feel their approach before hearing them. A trick the body learns once it trusts the patient clock of air. Maeve dozed near the mast, not asleep so much as letting competence rest its eyes. Ocho leaned against the forward beam and watched for the green wink of phosphorescence. When it so we'd smiled as if greeting cousins. Briggs traced the constellations with a blunt pencil on scrap canvas, mapping tomorrow's morals. Nothing chased us. Nothing scolded. The night stepped lightly, and we matched it. Visual. Dusky silver sea. Lowsail.com. Faces by starlight. Restrained chiaroscuro. Safe. Meditative mood. Sunrise wrote kindness along the eastern rim. We shook dew from the canvas, stretched our backs, and shared a small breakfast that behaved like a promise. Measured, nourishing, durable. Maeve unfolded the next page of Planangle, a touch north to flirt with a current weed sketched from birds and swell. Briggs marked the change. We calculated our day's ribbon and tucked a pencil behind his ear. Like a carpenter of miles, Ocho brewed a thin tea that tasted faintly of clove and remembered rain. I watched the water deepen to a steadier blue, then brighten again over a lighter patch, perhaps a shelf, perhaps a rumor of future land. We set the conch within easy reach and let hope be specific without becoming greedy. The ghoul appeared, circled once, and made a sound like approval signed with a feather. We chose to accept the compliment. Visual. Apricot dawn. Tidy deck. Faint birds. Soft oils. Hopeful air. Non-violent. Seascape. By late morning, a crate found our trailing line. Barnacled, but promising. We hooked it with friendly caution and pried the lid with a marlin's pick's patient honesty. Inside, canvas scraps, waxed thread, a bronze needle, and a small jar of cloves, sealed with Tartha, twin of the treasure the first island once gifted us. We chewed one clove each, letting the spice ring a small bell in the mouth, then set to stitching a brighter signal. 3 squares that said friend in a language any captain sensible about storms could read. Maeve mended a chafe point. Briggs inventoried with a grateful grin. He didn't tether to either. Ocho braided the new cloth to our pendants so welcome could fly farther. I tucked 2 extra patches into the bamboo tube for what? Evestead hadn't learned our names yet. The sea had sent materials for a better hello. We raised it, and the day felt larger, visual. Close-up of open crate fabric, needle, clove screw. Stitching a cheery flag, bright, safe tones, artisanal detail. The breeze carried a different conversation by midday, a quieter register that suggested thinking while you walk. Maeve trimmed a thumb of sheet, and Second Chance answered with a calmer gait. The decks, small music settling into considerate rhythms. Briggs updated the ledger with remarks that read like weather poetry, wind considerate, swell agreeable, crew unruffled. Then added a tidy column for small repairs we could do without breaking stride. Ocho checked each lashing with a musician's ear, plucking for tension until the lines confessed their comfort. I studied the sky's handwriting. Chimera's tales sketching future changes with elegant arrogance. We agreed to respect their opinion without surrendering today's peace. Lunch was on a reed a bow, a shera, a not end. We spoke of roots, not as conquests, but as invitations. If the world wanted us elsewhere, it would send proper correspondence. Until then, we sailed as if gratitude were a destination you can reach by staying teachable. Visual. Sun-bright raft. Crew tending lines, airy clouds, polished blues. Safe, maritime.com. A faint smudge teased the horizon, too low for cloud, too stubborn for smoke. We did not rush toward it. We grew more precise where we were. Maeve set a cautious angle that let us observe without announcing ourselves. Briggs measured our curiosity against water and time, then folded the ledger closed so we'd look with eyes. Nodarith. Ocha readied the conch and our friend flag, because welcome travels faster than explanation. I scanned for the plain language of birds, and there it was. Purposeful arcs, not idle loops. Land, or the rumor of it. We practiced our landing grammar, a loud reef respect. Soundings, honest, approach. On the exhale, the raft held herself with dignified anticipation. Sometimes the difference between patience and delay is ceremony. We chose ceremony, not to impress the sea, but to remind ourselves. We belong to manners now. Visual, distant, low, silhouette. Bright flag. Ready. Classical oils, gentle suspense. Non-violent detail. As we edged nearer, color revealed topography. A pale green belt above coral, then darker brush, then a ridge shaped like a thoughtful eyebrow. The reef gate wore a narrow smile, inviting a careful sentence rather than a speech. Maeve signaled 4 paddles. We shortened sail and let silence lead. Briggs cast the lead line, calling depth like an usher offering seats. 5, 4 and a half. 5 again. Ocho said the conch down listening felt louder than blowing. I marked a safe transit on our bamboo tube with a modest star, promising future us we'd remember this kindness. We slipped through on a swelled, soft exhale and found lagoon water tasting of forgiveness. No huts, no boats, only the possibility of neighbors who preferred discretion. We grounded the anchor stone gently and let the raft breathe. The island watched us without verdict. Visual. Coral Gate entry, paddles out. Pale lagoon, sunlit oils, respectful faces, calm scene. We landed on a beach that looked recently combed by wind. Turtle tracks wrote confident cursive between dunes and foam. Small crab doors dotted the intertidal like punctuation. We unpacked in a choreography that felt practiced without feeling proud. Shade first, water next. Tools by purpose rather than size. Maeve scouted the inland edge, returning with news of a spring that whispered under lava rock. Briggs established a commons of ordinary miracles, a cook ring, a drying line, a pile for useful drift. Ucho set the conch on a flat basalt table and hummed a note that tasted like welcome. I walked the curve of sand and found a napped shell blade tucked neatly in a crevice, sharp but rested. Someone had been careful here. Once, we replaced it exactly as we found it, and left a small arrow of white stones pointing to the spring. Gratitude prefers quiet handwriting. Visual. Tidy landing. Arrow of stones. Conchian Roque, warm beach palette, safe domestic energy. Evening council gathered in the generous shade of a leaning palm. The questions were household simple and therefore profound. Sail at dawn or study the reef another day. Marked 2 exits, or trust the main gate. How to keep our code intact if scarcity arrived disguised as opportunity. Share first. Speak true. Steer gentle, still sufficient. Still binding. May have proposed mapping both exits in moon view. Briggs would do soundings at first light to see if night honesty matched day honesty. Ocho promised a song we could row to if wind forgot us. I promised our chart would stay clear of wishful thinking. We sealed decisions with bowls held until cool and a fire so modest it resembled manners more than flame. Stars came on like punctual friends, and a breeze lifted the palm fronds with the dignity of a curtain call. Visual. Palm-shaded council. Modest fire. Star-pricked sky. Soft, hand-painted harmony. Night here offered new instruments. Tree frogs stitched a shimmering undercurrent while the lagoon rehearsed a lullaby in 2 keys. We paired the watch again, Maeve, with Ocho first. Riggs with May. After their hour passed in soft hand signals and a single whispered correction to the anchor set, hours unfolded like a class taught by shadows. How to read a pale band where sand reases. How to feel a change in fetch when a bend in reef agrees to shelter you more. A thaw storm embroidered the clouds with heatless lightning. We admired the needlework and minded our own hem. When a rustle near the palms suggested turtle business, we turned our backs and gave privacy, as if it were low. Some ceremonies required darkness and respect. We provided both. Visual. Moon-washed lagoon. Silvered palms. Faint lightning. Gentle. Chiaroscuro. Safe. Preverin moot. Dawn opened like a reasoned argument that everyone agreed to. We cooked simply, filled skins from the spring, and set out to chart the second exit. While the sun was still polite, Maeve steered by texture places where water braided differently and Briggs paid out. The lead with a rhythm that could calm jealous gods. Hocho marked coral heads with twined ribbons of palm fiber that would slip free in the next big blow. Guidance without graffiti. I drew a clean lane on the chart, then copied it again smaller, so memory would have a spare. When we threaded back to the beach, the raft's shadow had already become a familiar stain on the lagoon floor. Familiarity, we'd learned, is what safety looks like when it relaxes. Visual, mapping pass between coral heads, temporary markers, bright turquoise oils, meticulous but calm action. A canoe shape on the far side of the lagoon paused our breath, but it proved to be a log keeping its own counsel. Relief didn't arrive as laughter. It arrived as better posture. We turned the moment into practice. Hail with flag first, voice second, conch only if answered. Hands visible, tools restful. Maeve drilled the script until it felt like muscle. Briggs prepared small offerings, a coil of good line. To fish a palm strip with our spring arrows sketched in friendly strokes. Ocho composed a 4-note phrase that traveled cleanly across water without sounding like a summons. I rehearsed the polite bow of the head that means we're guests, then went about sharpening our helpfulness instead of our edges. Hospitality, we decided, is also seamanship. Visual.com Lagoon. Rehearsal of signals. Small gift bundle. Sunlit clarity. Nonviolent. Courteous mood. Afternoon turned industrious. We mended a chafe on the luff with a bronze needle from yesterday's crate, stitched a brighter panel into the friend flag, and set a small rack to smoke fish for travel. Maeve tuned the steering oar's blade, thinning its edge to bite cleanly without bullying the water. Briggs inventoried with the contentment of a grocer, whose shelves finally make sense. Acha braided a soft sling so the conch could ride without bruising. I cleaned the bamboo chalk tube and wrote a brief margin note for future selves. Kindness moves faster than fear. When a breeze lifted the drying fronds, the camp smelled of citrus, wood smoke, and possibility. Nothing grand, everything sufficient. Visual. Close-up camp, task stitching, or shaping. Smoking rack, warm artisanal oils, safe practicality. At sunset, we walked the tide line and read the day backward, our footprints smudging into newness, the raft's keel mark softening, The shell arrows still crisp, we spoke thanks aloud to tools that behaved, to weather that negotiated, to the wide world for letting small intentions matter. Maeve set tomorrow's plan with pencil certainty. Departed first light by the new exit, followed the bird's deliberate arc, and keep a respectful distance from the ridge that shaped the wind like a clever hand. Briggs agreed in the language of portions and intervals. Ocho promised a song that begins quiet and stays generous. I promised to remember that arrival is an ownership. It's stewardship on loan. The sky took the promise and blushed it into purple. The lagoon accepted. And so did we. Visual. Violet dusk. Footprints fading. Raft at rest. Luminous oils. Gentle, closing harmony. Berpikiv. Berpikiv. The tide carried us outward by dawn. Our new exit, drawing a clean sentence across the lagoon's page. Maeve stood easy at the steering oar, guiding second chance through the coral corridor we'd mapped like careful handwriting. Beyond the gate, Swell welcomed us, with that respectful shoulder we'd come to trust. Briggs logged our start with a note that felt like a blessing disguised as math. Wind modest, crew steady, prospects honest. Ocho raised the friend flag, and let it Rapola brideward we preferred to shout. I stowed our small gifts in an accessible crate, a quiet promise to meet strangers as neighbors. The sky wore a robe of pale ribbon clouds that meant business later. Not now. We held our angle, listening for the sea's edits, and accepting them without argument. When the Iden thinned to a brushstroke, and finally to thought, none of us waved. Our gratitude traveled better inside the ribs. Visual. Dawn departure, through second reef gate, polished turquoise to cobalt. Gradient, come crew. Safe, maritime moment. Mid-morning found a current that behaved like a moving walkway. Mavi smiled without spending it. Speed is sweeter when it isn't bragged about. We trimmed to efficiency. Reef lines tidy. Halyard belayed clean as a hymn. Briggs demonstrated set and drift again with chalk on the deck. Bedding spray erased the lesson exactly when memory could bear the load alone. Ocho tuned the conch to a low friendliness, and then hung it quiet. Because invitation should wait for context, I watched birds draw precise strokes across the sky. Turns commuting. The sheer water, writing slanted script. A distant frigate bird practicing expert thrift. The raft took on the posture of a reader, absorbed in a good paragraph. If weather meant to interrupt, it would send punctuation first. Until then, we sailed the sentence out. Visual. Long cobalt lanes with birds overhead. Taut canvas, orderly deck. Bright but gentle oils. Nonviolent detail. A shadow line ahead hinted at a shelf or a field of coral heads thinking their own thoughts under the blue. We shortened sail, shipped the steering oar, and reached for paddles to add finesse. Where enthusiasm would be clumsy, Maeve read texture catspaws swirling where depths changed. Glassy panes where sand rose. Briggs paid out the lead line and called depths like polite door numbers. 6, 5, 5 and a feather. Ocho kept the bow honest with small draws. A musician's wrist, teaching water to like us. I marked the lane on our chart with a tidy star and a note. Generous on the ebb. We crossed the patch without scraper drama. A small success that warmed the day more than sun. Sometimes seamanship is less victory than courtesy performed correctly. We praised to the raft with a touch along the mast. And let the sea hear our thanks. Visual. Careful transit over pale water. Paddles assisting. Soft. Clear oils. Attentive faces. Noon. Invited honesty. Heat arrived. Dressed in ceremony. And we answered with chez democracy and a measured meal. Ocho folded herbs into fish as if flavor were a letter to be mailed with exact postage. Maeve taught a knot for closing and reopening a sack with one hand useful for rations, arguments, and every conversation you hope to revisit kindly. Briggs portioned water by the hourglass, and not the wish. The day felt kinder for it. I repaired a chief point on the friend flag. So welcome would not fray first. We kept conversation at the pitch of competence. Who holds second watch? What stars we LL trust tonight? How to store the stove so surprise never has a match. The sea answered with a low, approving percussion. It is difficult to be afraid while doing small things well. Visual. Awning, shade, bowls in a neat line. Simple repairs, sun-washed deck. Domestic.com. Safe scene, afternoon soft. The wind, thoughtful, asked us to mate it halfway. We obliged, reefing modestly and accepting a slower grammar of miles. Maeve had me steer by swell instead of sky for an hour. Learning to let the hips listen while the eyes relax, Briggs opened a page titled Grace Notes, tiny improvements that cost almost nothing. A whisker pole lash marked for quick find. A coil taught to fall forward, not back. A knife returned edge out. So the fingers thank you tomorrow. Ocho hummed intervals rather than tunes, the kind of sound that keeps a group breathing together. I penciled a reminder on the chart tube. Speed whispers when trim is kind. The sea responded with smaller, tighter ripples that made our wake prettier than usual. A vanity we allowed ourselves. Beauty, when earned by attention, behaves like good luck that pays taxes. Visual, modest sail, long swells, crew doing microt, muted afternoon palette. Contemplative oils, toward evening. The horizon lifted a darker blue weather. Not trouble, unless someone insisted. We chose not to insist. Maeve set us on a comfortable reach and rehearsed the squall drill in short, courteous sentences. Briggs timed our motions with a quiet count. Ocho coiled lines into open invitations. I checked lashings and felt them answer with that snug, confident tick. The front arrived as a courteous orchestra. Wind and measured crescendos, rain and silver threads, waves and attentive applause. We kept to the sail's easy edge and let the raft dance the steps. It already knew when the rain passed. It left us linen fresh and slightly taller in spirit. Stars claimed their posts. The sea put its hands back in its pockets. We thanked the weather for its lesson and logged it in plain words. No heroics required. Visual, rain-slick deck, reefed canvas, afterglow stars, serene, non-violent storm passage. Night widened like a well-told story. We steered by the crooked kite and that stubborn arrow, counting heartbeats between friendly puffs. Maeve taught me to feel wind by cheek and ear, then verify by luff. Trust first, prove second. Briggs whispered the names of a few dim stars that rarely get applause, yet hold the sky honest. Ocho set the whistle aside and chose silence as accompaniment, which improved the song of everything else. I wrote a single sentence on the chart's margin. We're learning to be carried without being careless. The raft spoke in tiny wooden vowels, all of them stable. A low bloom of phosphorescence traced our wake like a signature we were finally proud to leave. We stood our watches, unhurried, and let the dark do its best work. Visual star sharp dome. Soft wake glow. Steady cool. Luminous oils. Calm and safe. Just before dawn, the world held its breath. Wing paused. Swells flattened. And even our thoughts practiced being lighter. Mauvais poured a finger of water for the Sahir-old habit of respect and asked it to send errands our way. The request was granted in birds. 3 turns arrowing northwest. A sheer water low and purposeful. Briggs adjusted our plan by a patient angle. Small change, big difference. Ocha brewed, thin tea with cloves. The steam riding kindness on the air. I felt that quiet click when direction and desire shake hands. If Landwhitehead was not urgent, if it didn't, we were already doing the work that makes no outcome feel like failure. When dawn finally colored the horizon, we were ready to read it, not bend it. Visual. Pre-dawn hush. Silhouettes at calm helm. First blush of light. Restrained. Hopeful. Palette. Sunrise. Unscrolled a soft atlas. Pale green near the rim. Roosed violets above. And a clean bar of gold that could convince anyone to continue. We stretched the sail to morning's appetite and moved with a confidence that didn't require brass. Maeve marked cloud towers far off afternoon. Concerns and then smiled at a tidy line where darker water met light. Current's gift, she said, Briggs entered the courtesy into the ledger and closed it as if not to jinx gratitude by over. Ocho set the friend flag a touch higher. The cloth returned the favor with an eager flutter. I checked our small gifts and added a coil of brand new line to the bundle. Generosity, like sailcloth, lasts longer when reinforced. The raft hummed the note we've come to trust, a quiet sea of competence. Visual. Golden morning. Bright flag. Clean wake. Classic. Oils. Safe. Confident movement. By late morning, a low shape materialized where probability and hope had shaken hands. Not a city, not even a village, just a forgiving shoulder of land with a reef gate drawing a narrow smile. We didn't sprint. Ceremony first. Speed later. May have set the approach. Briggs read depths. Ocho held the conch. Like a greeting, I eased the sheet until our low matched the sea's volume. When we slipped through, the lagoon brightened as if glad to see our manners. Sand curved into a small bay. Palms leaned like listeners, and shadows promised rest. Without debt, we grounded the anchor stone, breathed together, and let the raft float a moment longer before asking anything else of her. Arrival, we remembered, is not conquest. It's a chance to keep being decent. Somewhere new. Visual lagoon entry to Modest Bay. Crew composed. Some lit serenity. Gentle figures. Non-violent landing. We let the lagoon finish its welcome before stepping ashore, then landed with the same courtesy we wanted from fate. Shade first, water next. Tools where hands could find them in the dark. Maeve scouted the downwind edge of the cove and found a shallow creek slipping out from under stone. Tasting of leaf and patience, Briggs logged bearings and a modest plan for the day. Map the rim, test the reef gate at half-tide, cook kindly, sleep early. Ocho set the conch on a smooth basalt table. As though presenting a guest of honor that prefers listening, I walked to the high dead line and read the island's diary. Drift fruits, feather quills, a few tidy shells cracked by birds, nothing wasteful, no footprints, but ours. The quiet felt earned rather than empty, like a chapel after good news. We agreed to keep camplight signatures, not scars. Second chance rested above the rack line. Her shadow dark on sand like ink we intended to use well. Visual. Pale lagoon. Careful landing. Conch. Unbasalt. Warm, calm palate. Safe. Domestic scene. After breakfast we mapped the cove with the tenderness, usually save 4 letters home. Mave led along tide pools, where miniature worlds rehearsed their shining. She traced channels with the tip of her oar. As if underlining a poem, Briggs paced distances in double counts, then have them to remove haste from the math. Ocho hummed a walking tune that left space for waves to contribute their percussion. I sketched in charcoal on a sail scrap. Headlands, like bent knuckles. A reef gate shaped like a smile you trust. Palms leaning, as though conferring about weather. We found a notch in the cliff where swallows had pasted mud homes under an overhang architecture humble and perfect. Near the creek's mouth, turtle tracks braided the beach, clean as calligraphy. The map looked plain because the place didn't require decoration. It asked only to be understood. We dated the corner and added 3 words we meant to honor. Treat is borrowed. Visual. Shore mapping walk. Charcoal sketch. Swallow ledge. Hand-painted naturalism. Non-violent detail. At half-tide we tested the outer gate with the care of surgeons. Paddles ready. Sail trim shy. Lead line on us. Maeve read texture. Where a darker riffle meant depth and a pale ribbon warned. Mind your manners. Briggs. Cold soundings. Like addresses. 4. 5 and a feather. And I marked the track on our chart tube with a modest star. Ocho stirred the conch and let silence do the greeting. Some doors prefer a soft knock. We eased out, turned a slow circle to learn the swell's paragraph, then returned on the exhale. Partners not conquers. The lagoon brightened as if approving our pronunciation. We'll leave by this gate tomorrow, Maeve decided, but only if morning keeps its promises. No one argued with a sentence that's sensible. We secured the raft, logged the tide's opinion, and let the rest of the day shrink its shoulders. Competence, repeated, becomes kindness you can measure. Visual. Cordal Pastrial. Puddles poised. Calm faces. Clear turquoise oils. Respectful seamanship. The inland path rose through pandanus and scattered stone, offering views that widened our lungs. We found a clearing stitched with old hearth circles. Stones blackened to a dignified gray. No ash, no litter. Just the geometry of earlier hunger solved well. Someone had lived lightly and left lightly. Ocho uncovered a shard of fired clay, the color of warm bread. Briggs turned it in his hand as if asking it for a date. It didn't tow him. We set the shard back, where sun could dry it and memory could keep it. The clearing had good wind, gentle shade, and a kind of silence that edits your thoughts without humiliation. Maeve tested the creek farther upslope. Tasted, approved. I etched a small arrow on a flat rock, pointing down to water, then stepped away. Instructions should be useful and nearly invisible. By the time we returned to the beach, our feet had learned the island's gait. Measured, unargumentative, awake, visual. Dappled grove with old hearth rings. Clay shard on stone, soft greens and grays. Contemplative, safe mood. We made a modest meal and baptized it with patience. Fish simmered with crushed leaves that smelled like a promise to be gentle. Fruit passed in fair turns. Water sipped by the hour instead of the wish. Conversation visited practical rooms. Spare or position. Night watch pairs. The choreography of leaving if the sea requested haste. Ocho proposed a signal drill, and Maeve seconded, with a smile that new drills prevent drama. Briggs drew a tiny table in the ledger situations. Responses. One kind thing to add in each case. Amended a chafe in the awning edge, so the shade would last as long as gratitude. After we ate, we carried our pots to the creek mouth and rinsed them where outflow met tide. A handshake that left no soap behind. When the sun leaned west, our shadows lengthened, but our worries did not. The day had chosen sufficiency. We followed suit. Visual, simple. Cooking circle, by shade. Creek rinse, a tight edge. Warm, homely oils. Non-violent domesticity. The evening council asked fewer questions than usual, which felt like progress. Sail at dawn, Maeve said. Gate on the ebb, then hold a patient reach west by north. Briggs would pace water by careful sips and count birds like mileposts. Ocho tuned the conch for greeting, not alarm, and packed 2 small gift bundles. A coil of good line and dried fruit. Should we meet kindness and wish to reciprocate instantly, I promised to keep the chart honest when desire attempted edits. We sealed the plan by smoothing sand over our footprints instead of making oaths. Stars arrived with punctual relief, and the palm above us rustled like a page being turned by a considerate reader. We slept with tools laid out for morning and shoes pointed toward the gate. A house ready for guests or departure, either welcome. Visual. Palm-shaded council at dusk. Tools arrayed neatly. Violet sky. Safe. An orderly mood. Night carried a lesson about attention. A gentle swell shifted direction near midnight, and the raft made a new small sound timber speaking in a different vowel. Mave rose, adjusted the mooring angle by a hand's width, and the vowel changed back to comfort. She didn't wake us. She wrote it in the ledger for morning. Tiny act, large result. Later, a breeze brought the clean ache of distant rain without the wet. The palms leaned, considered, then settled. Oko's turn at watch looked like stillness, poured carefully. My hour with Briggs included a quiet exercise, naming constellations we rarely used, yet trusted to keep the sky square. We let silence grade our work and pass. When dawn thought about entering, we were already tidy inside. Visual. Moonlit camp. Small adjustment. At mooring.com watchers. Cool silvers and greens. Serene. Safe composition. Morning arrived with linen colors and the confidence of a well-written list. We at day simply stowed carefully and slid second chance to the lagoon with motions that have forgotten how to hurry. The reef gate wore its narrow smile. We matched it with our own. Maeve took the steering aware and set a generous angle. Briggs called soundings like blessings. Ocha lifted the friend flag and placed the gift bundles where a neighborly reach could find them. I folded the shade tight and lashed gear so even surprise would admire our housekeeping. We posed just inside the gate. Listen and know. Thunder of reef tantrum. No sulk of current. Only the patient syllables of water offering passage. On the exhale, Maeve said. Then we went beyond the lip. The ocean laid a blue road thin as a ribbon, and just as useful. Visual. Dawn exit to smiling gate. Flag flying. Crew poised. Polished turquoise to cobalt. Calm oils. Nonviolent departure. B mid-morning. The sea sent errands. Disguised as details. A dock band hinted at a current. We shifted one hand north and felt the raft relax. A scuff on the sheet whispered for wax. Ocho obliged, and the whisper turned to purr. The halyard's coil wanted to fall the wrong way. Briggs retotted with 2 patient tosses and a smile. I mocked bird arcs on the sharp 3 turns to windward. A solitary shearwater, tracing a deliberate diagonal end. Sketched a modest triangle where their paths agreed. May have called for a finger of ease, and the sail forgave the gust before it asked. Our progress felt like literacy rewarded. We read, we answered, we improved the sentence. No heroics, only the exquisite ordinariness of getting many small things right in a row. The horizon noticed and remained generous. Visual, open cobalt lanes, crew refining trim, small fixes, bright but gentle oils, safe seamanship. Afternoon revealed blend the way kindness reveals character slowly. Truthfully, a low ridge lifted from haze, backed by a taller shadow shouldering clouds. We did not sprint. Ceremony first. Again, Maeve set our approach to meet the reef gate on an exhale. Briggs read depth and honest numbers. Ocho readied the conch with a note that meant peace to your shore. I eased the sheet until our low matched a quiet. The lagoon within was spacious, holding blues that made the word home. Try on a new coat. Palms stewed like listeners, and a line of dark stones suggested an anchorage favored by thoughtful people. We grounded the anchor stone and let the raft breathe before asking anything more from her. Arrival is stewardship on loan. I wrote on the chart margin. Everyone nodded. Not dramatically, just correctly. Visual, generous lagoon, calm, anchorage line, composed crew, luminous oils welcoming, nonviolent, close.